This is video 10.7, volumes of prisms and cylinders. To find the volume of a prism, you take the product of the area of the base by the height. So this would be our formula, volume equals base times height. Let's think about what that means. Let's say that I have a prism that has the dimensions of 5 by 3 and a height of 1. Let's say this is all in centimeters. Now, if I want to calculate the volume, I'm looking for how many little cubic centimeters I could fit inside this particular prism. Well, I know my prism has a side of 5 and a side of 3. So if I were to multiply 5 times 3, I would get 15, which means that I could line up 15 or 5 by 3 rows of little cubic centimeters inside the prism because it's only 1 centimeter high. Now let's imagine that instead of it being a 1 centimeter high prism, that it was instead taller or 4 centimeters high. Now instead of one layer of these 15 cubes, I would have 4 layers. So I would take the area of my base, or that first layer of 15 cubes, and multiply it by 4, which would give me a total of 60 centimeters or cubic centimeters that would fit inside my new prism. So that's where the formula, the area of the base times the height of the prism, gives us the volume. And that would be true of all prisms. So let's look at this first prism. Let's say that this here is a base, and then here is our second base. Our base is 1 5/10 by 3 3/10. So this would be the area of my base. My height, which I'm going to multiply by my base, is the distance between the two bases. So that's going to be this distance right here from base to base. And that would be 2 centimeters. So my height is going to be 2. So I'm taking my base times my height. If I multiply 1 5/10 times 3 3/10 times 2, I get 9 9/10 centimeters cubed. Now, for this particular situation, I'm going to round this to the nearest whole number, which would give me 10 cubic centimeters, because it says round to the nearest whole number. So the volume of this particular prism is 10 centimeters cubed to the nearest whole number. Now let's look at this second prism. Now this one's different because it doesn't have a rectangular base. Remember, the faces of my prism need to be rectangles, so that means that this and this have to be considered my bases. My bases are triangular, so to find the area of my base, I'm going to take and use this formula to find my triangle. Alright, it's 17 by 24 times a half would give me the area of the base of this prism. The height is measured from base to base, so it's going to be this distance here, which is 31 times height, 31. If I multiply this out, 17 times 24 times a half gives me 204 times my height of 31, which will give me 6,324 cubic inches will fill this prism, or be the volume of this particular prism. So the only thing that really changes from prism to prism is how you find the area of your base, if it's triangular or rectangular. Now let's think about finding the volume of a cylinder. If I look up here, for finding the volume of a cylinder, it is again taking the base times the height to find the volume. Only this time we're finding a base that is a circle. So we're going to use, for the base, the formula pi r squared. So let's find the volume of this particular cylinder. It has a diameter of 50, which means its radius is 25 feet. So I'm going to take 25 squared pi. That would give me my base times my height. And remember, my height is measured from base to base, so it's this distance here. So it's times 75. So I've got my base times my height. 25 squared is 625 pi times 75, which is my height, which will give me 46,875 pi. And again, we're talking about cubic feet, because we're talking about how many little 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot cubes will fit inside my cylinder. So this would be my answer. Right, now let's make it a little more complicated. Now we're going to look to find the unknown dimension and round it to the nearest whole number and leave it in terms of pi. Now for this particular shape, the prism, we don't have to worry about pi. We know the volume, so we know base times height equals volume, so I'm going to use this formula. So my volume is 57,750, and that should equal my base, which is the dimensions 35 by W, times my height, which is measured from base to base, which is 33. If I multiply this out, 33 times 55 is 1,155 W equals 57,750. I'm going to divide both sides by 1,155, which will give me W equals 50 yards. So this portion of my base, this dimension of my base, would be 50 yards. So that's how I would go about finding an unknown dimension. Now let's look here at how we would do that same process to find the height of our cylinder here. Again, we know volume, which is 64,795. That should equal our base. Okay, we know our radius is 25, so that's 25 squared pi times whatever our height would be. So 64,795 equals 25 squared is 625 pi times height. I'm going to divide both sides by 625, which cancels this out, which leaves me with 103 and 672 thousandths equals height pi. I'm going to divide both sides by pi. Now if I wanted to leave this in terms of pi, this would be my answer. 103 and 672 thousandths divided by pi is my height. But we're going to approximate it. So we're actually going to divide, we're going to substitute pi with 3.14. So pi cancels out, we're left with height over here. and we get approximately, this is approximation, 33 millimeters. That's rounded to the nearest whole number. That's our approximation. Now let's make it a little more complicated. Let's say that we have a solid that's composed of prisms and half cylinders. Find the volume of the solid and round to the nearest whole number. So what do I have here? I have 1/2 of a cylinder, and I have one prism. Okay. My cylinder is going to be base times height, and then divided by 2 because it's only half a cylinder. And my prism is going to be base times height. So I'm going to start with my prism because that's going to be easier. My prism has the dimensions of 18 by 22 for its base. Or let's say it's 18 by 10. Let's make this my base. This is the dimension here, 10. So if my base is 18 times 10, my height is measured from base to base, so that's going to be this portion here, or 22. If I multiply this out, I get 180 times 22, or 3,960 cubic inches. And that would be the volume of my prism. Now let's find the volume of my cylinder, or actually of my half cylinder. So my cylinder, I need to know the radius. Well, I can see that my diameter of my cylinder is going to be the same as the length, side length of the base of my prism. So the diameter is 18, so that means that the radius is 9. So I'm going to take 9 squared pi for the base of my cylinder, and I'm going to multiply that times the height of my cylinder, which again is measured from base to base, so it's going to be the same here, 22. If I multiply this out, I get 81 pi times 22, or 1,782 pi. And that equals the volume of my cylinder. Now the entire shape is going to be my cylinder, half of it, so I need to divide this by 2. 1,782 divided by 2 would give me 891 pi for the half cylinder that I have here. That's inches cubed, and I need to add that to this. So now I have 3,960 inches cubed plus 891 pi inches cubed. This represents my prism, and this represents my half cylinder. Okay, you'll notice here that these are not like terms. That means I can't add them together. One is in terms of pi and one isn't. So this would be the final answer for the volume of this shape that is made up of cylinders and prisms. Now there's a problem here for you to try, and this is the end of the video on volumes of prisms and cylinders.